Hello and welcome to the first video of a set of videos which will show you how to set up a Raspberry Pi to control a KNX system using Node on the Raspberry Pi. This will make for a very powerful and very cheap controller for a KNX system. So just to give you an introduction as to why I decided to do this, I've had a KNX system in my house now for about a year and a half, and I've been messing about with different control mechanisms. Initially I started off, the installer lent me a home server and I had that running, and that runs okay, but it's a big piece of kit, it's extremely expensive, and if I'm honest, the front end was pretty lousy. You couldn't really tinker with it to do anything interesting. And I wanted to do something a little bit cheaper, a little bit more fun, and something where I could really understand what was going on under the hood. So I decided to use a Raspberry Pi to control this. Now Raspberry Pis are £25. There's loads of support. Everything's open on them, and so that's the way I went. So I'm turning my back on the expensive solutions provided by the KNX manufacturers, and we're going down a low-cost route using Node on the Raspberry Pi. So why use Node? Well, it's a JavaScript language, so that means it's pretty simple to program. There's loads of support for Node on the web and loads of resources. And then the actual fundamentals of Node make it really useful to use. It's what's known as asynchronous, so that means it can run multiple. It can kind of run multiple processes all at the same time, and the code doesn't get blocked. So that makes it really useful for event-driven processes like home automation, where a switch will be turned on and then shortly later it will be turned off, and what you want multiple processes working, running events off of the events that are experienced on the bus. It's also really easy to integrate Node with a whole host of other services and products on the web. And it also forms the basis of the mean stack, which is a JavaScript stack for the whole website. So you can have a database, which would be something like a Mongo database with Mongoose on top of that, which is coded in. So you're interacting with a database purely in JavaScript, and then you would have an Express server, which is again coded up in JavaScript using Node, serving up web pages, and then you could have Angular on top of that, which would be rendering the web pages. So the whole front end to back end is all in JavaScript, and that makes it really useful, so you can kind of stay in one language. So that's why I decided to use Node. So just to give you an idea of what we're going to be doing, effectively we have a KNX system where we have switches, temperature gauges, maybe presence detectors and more, and when someone comes along and switches the switch on, a data packet is sent along the green KNX bus to all of the different actuators, and this will have a specific address that it's addressed to. So let's say it's addressed to this actuator here. The data will come out of the switch down the KNX bus, and it'll be picked up by this actuator, which will switch on the light, and the light will come on. Similarly, for say something like a temperature gauge, this will be monitoring the temperature in a room all the time, so it might be sending out little messages every minute or so about the temperature in the room. If the temperature in the room drops below a certain amount, then the heating actuator, which this temperature gauge is linked to, will switch on, and that will turn on the radiators. So that's the very basics of KNX. If you want more information on KNX, look at some of my other videos which talk about the ins and outs of KNX in more detail. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to effectively be connecting a Raspberry Pi to this bus and then doing a lot of cool shit with that Raspberry Pi. So what kind of things are we going to do? Well, here's just an example of some of the things that I've done, which I'll be showing you later on in this series. So a really cool one is we're going to log all of the KNX bus events to a Google spreadsheet using if this then that, which is really handy. So effectively this means that you can monitor all of the events remotely, or and do lots of kind of interesting things with the Google spreadsheet. So that opens up a whole new world of pleasure with that. We're also going to create a heating controller, and that's basically about using the Raspberry Pi to time events and send out messages on the KNX bus to control actuators, and so for example turning on the heating. We're also going to link in some non-KNX magnetic door sensors. So these are sort of pretty cheap reed switch door sensors, and we're going to link those through the Raspberry Pi to the KNX rather than have very expensive KNX door sensors. Similarly, we're going to link in some Bluetooth sensors to KNX actuators, and what this is I have a heat recovery ventilation unit in my house, and what I wanted it to do is when I have a shower, I wanted the towel rails to come on and dry the towels after the shower. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some Bluetooth humidity sensors, put those in the pipes for the air intakes for the HVAC, and when they sense high levels of humidity, it'll switch on the towel rails for 30 minutes. We're also going to create lighting scenes. So you have it hit a light switch and it'll turn on multiple lights around the house. So we're going to create that in a non-KNX way. It's going to be all run through the Raspberry Pi, and of course we're going to do loads more. So these are just some of the projects, and what will be is an individual project will be contained in one of these in a video. So we're just going to run through the basic setup, which you'll have to put together to do this. So you'll need a Raspberry Pi, go for a B version, a 2 or a 3. They're easily powerful enough to manage all of the calculations. You're obviously going to need a power supply for the Raspberry Pi, and a USB KNX interface like this one here. This is a Merton one. I've also got a Jira one. I picked both of these up off eBay relatively cheaply. They are quite expensive, and that's the thing with KNX stuff, is it is quite expensive, but it is robust and very stable. So this is just an example of my setup that I have here. I've pulled off the cover of the wiring unit, and I'll just run you through what you can see here. So you can see this is the KNX power supply unit. So it's taking mains power in and powering out the KNX bus. So you can see all of the KNX bus wires linked in here, all the red and black ones, and they go out into these green wires which thread their way out across the rest of their house. So that's the KNX bus. Then we've got a KNX USB interface, so you can see the KNX bus wires going into the KNX unit, the USB interface there, and then the USB cable coming out of the USB, and it kind of curls around and then goes into the Raspberry Pi. So here we've got a Raspberry Pi, we've got a power line connected to that, which is just plugged into a main socket. And I did notice that you can actually get 12 volt rackable power supplies, so you could actually make this neater and put a power supply in here. I also bought this this casing to rack the Raspberry Pi, but you can see the little image there. It's got a Bluetooth dongle on there, a Bluetooth 4 dongle, and we've also got I've got a USB cable running off just to a USB memory stick. You can also see a host of little yellow wires running into the GPIO pins, and they're connected to some of the magnetic door sensors. You can see here the door sensors, these yellow and blue wires, and they feed off these white cables up here, and you can see that sort of back door garage door, and so on. So these are magnetic door sensors which have been embedded in all of the doors when the house was built, and they run into this cabinet too. And then we've got a couple more cables here, which are the Ethernet cable. So I'm lucky enough to have a hardwired Ethernet system around the house, but it doesn't really matter how your Raspberry Pi is connected to your local network. Mine just happens to be hardwired, but it can be done over Wi-Fi, no problem. So that's my setup. I don't think there's anything else to show there. It looks a bit of a jumble of wires, but hopefully now I've explained what's going on there, it makes a little more sense. So the software you're going to need, I haven't checked this on multiple software platforms, so this is what I've used and this works fine. So I've got a Raspberry Pi 2B, I think, and on that I've installed 2015-05 Raspberry and Wheezy. That works fine with the EBD connection, which I installed from Mikhail's tech blog. Now Mikhail is a bit of a legend really with the work that he's done connecting Raspberry Pis to KNX systems. So I just want to doff my cap to Mikhail because he's done some, well, without his work none of this would have been possible, and I've had hours of endless fun. So thank you Mikhail for that. You'll also need a node from Adafruit, and also final thing is I found it more convenient to set up an SSH connection into the Raspberry Pi. So I'll just run you through that. So I'm going to assume that you can install Raspberry Wheezy on a card and get the Raspberry Pi up and running. There's a whole host of tutorials online which will show you exactly how to do that. I usually always run through them on the web anyway. So I think I did this. Here we are. So this is what I did. I ran through this yesterday. And you just follow these instructions why is that not working? You just follow these instructions to install the Raspberry, the operating system on the Raspberry Pi. It's pretty straightforward. Works a treat. Once you've got the Raspberry Pi set up, it's worthwhile just fiddling around to enable SSH and also updating your local time settings so that when there's daylight savings or comes and goes, then your operating system timing will update, so that if you're running any events using timing systems, then it doesn't, it'll stay in line with the local time, so your heating will come on at the right time. So it's worthwhile doing that at the outset. So that's the operating system for the Raspberry Pi. When you get the Raspberry Pi up and running, just use Mikhail's information. Actually, I need to his detailed tutorial. Let me just find it. And we want the Raspberry Pi with USB, and here we are, EBD with KNX USB interface, Mikkel's tech blog. This is a very good tutorial. It will run you through everything that you need to know to get this installed. It's a pretty straightforward installation. Let me just run through this a little bit more slowly. So yeah, you have to set up a static IP for your Raspberry Pi by opening up this file here. I prefer to use Nano rather than VI. I just prefer the interface when I'm doing things, but it's entirely up to you. This is this part of the tutorials does seem to be a little bit out of date with the new Raspberry Pis. So there are other tutorials which do this in a slightly different way online with the newer Raspberry Pis. But essentially, it's the same thing. You're setting up a static IP for your Raspberry Pi. As I say, if you type that into Google, you'll find a tutorial which will do that. And then you can kind of get to the beef of it. So we're going to download and install this bit of this script, and this will do a whole set of things. It'll install all of the underlying software that you require, that the Raspberry Pi requires to connect to the USB. And you can see here it supports a whole host of different KNX USB interfaces. I'm using the Jira one and the Merton one. They seem to work fine. The Merton one seems to be a little bit less stable than the Jira. I've had some issues with the Merton USB interface that I haven't been able to resolve. But there you go. So yeah, it's pretty easy. You just run these commands as outlined by Michelle, and this will installs in about 10 minutes, and then you're good to go. So I've actually already done that. So I'm just going to SSH into one of my Raspberry Pi, and which has this installed, and we can see whether this is working. So I'm going to just check. I think we can check. We'll run this. So this runs through it, and then you follow this tutorial out and read it in detail. And then it says check that the process is running to see if you see EIB packets on the wire. So I'll just do that. This is where it all goes wrong. Let's hope. So there you can see this is packets on the wire. This is working. So I followed this tutorial and it worked a treat. And yeah, that's the next step. You can see the packets on the wire. So everything's working. I've got the everything connected. So the Raspberry Pi connected to the Ethernet, which I'm SSHing into through my local network, and then the Raspberry Pi is connected via that USB hub, and to the KNX via that USB hub. And what we're doing is we're reading packets of data on the wire now. So you can see the source address and the destination address, and then this is the data. So so that's the sort of raw data that's on the wire. And final thing now is to install Node. And the best way that I've found of finding Node is the Adafruit's version. So if you type Node Adafruit into Google, you'll get installing Node.js Adafruit Learning System. This is a great tutorial, works a treat. Again, very simple, just follow the tutorial and you will get Node installed. So you can see that I have so Node, so the installation that's current at the moment, when I did this, I installed this all on here yesterday, is version 0.12.6. Now Node is, it hasn't actually reached version 1.0 yet, so it does change quite a lot, and you have to be a little bit cautious about updating packages, and we'll come to that a little bit later. So everything that I've tested so far works fine. So that's where you want to get to. So you want to have the EIBD installed from Mikkel's blog, and then Node installed on your Raspberry Pi, and then we'll crack on with the next video where we'll get some basic controls running on the Raspberry Pi using Node. So that concludes the video. I hope you'll join me for the rest of the set of videos. As I say, they'll build up into a whole host of different functionalities, but this is the basics, and so good luck, And any comments or questions, just post them up and I'll do my best to answer them. I hope to speak to you soon. Take care.